Hi, this is Riley. I'm a producer and engineer, and I'm also the studio manager at No Fun Club, which is where we are right now. So I've done a lot of freelancing in the past, going into different studios and using their equipment. And one thing that can be a little tricky is using a console you've never used for the first time. Because even if you're comfortable with the workflow of a console and you understand it, they're all different. So there's going to be things that might slow you down. So we wanted to make a video to go over everything you'll want to know to run a session on the Neve 5300 console. So it's not going to be an exhaustive video, just some cool and fun things. And we wanted to put it on YouTube for everyone because there's not a lot of videos about vintage consoles, but lots of people are interested in them. So either way, whoever you are, hopefully this video is fun for you. Now let's get into it. The Neve 5300 is a great sounding, easy to use, vintage Neve console. It came from a broadcast situation, so some of the naming is a bit different than modern conventions, but it's really easy to set up. This power switch on the wall turns on the console. It also turns on the NS10s, the 8kg spring reverb, and the MyTech headphone monitoring. The large DB37 cables for the MyTech headphone monitors also send power, so hook those up first before powering on. Around the back of the patch bay are two large DL connectors, which change whether the patchway is attached to DAW or tape. Let's start a fresh patch here. The big connectors we just showed on the back of the patch bay connect to the multi-track output, which half normals to the line input. This means there's an internal connection that's always active between the corresponding outputs and inputs. Because it's half normaled and not full normaled, you could connect a patch cable from one of the multi-track outputs to another line input and split the signal. It won't interrupt the internal connection. So at this point, whether you've selected tape or DAW, the outputs should be set up to come up on the corresponding channel of the console without any need for patching. So this is the Neve's monitor section. It's where we set what we hear from the main monitor outputs of the console. It should normally be set to 2T OP, which is the output of all the channels to the G-track mix, but sometimes you might want to set it to 2B PB to monitor the 2-track playback. Beside the monitor selector is the monitor output knob, and over here a couple more important buttons. This should normally be set to OP, and this should be set to mixdown. Over in the middle of the console, you're going to want to make sure the green 2T fader is all the way up. Now this fader is going to control the level you hear in the room, but remember it's also the level of the mix going to the computer or tape machine, so be aware of that. On either side of the console are these Talkback switches. They are useful for talking to the band, but they do mute the speaker and this one stays in place. So if you don't hear anything, check that. So as an example, I have a recording coming out of 1 and 2 on the multi-track output. Remember the line inputs of the console are half normal to the multi-track outputs, so we don't need to patch anything. Looking at the input control of the channel, the red knob right by the EQ controls the input gain, and this knob also controls whether we're taking a mic or a line signal. I know we have a line level signal coming in, so I'm going to turn this over to line territory. And now we can see the overload light is coming on. That means that we're getting signal, but it's probably too hot. So I'll back that down a little bit, and that looks better. Each channel has a routing section on top. This is where you decide where the signal goes after it leaves the channel, and also if the channel is being monitored. There is a 2T left and right, and also 16 groups, but we won't talk about those right now. We'll come back to them. 2T stands for 2-track, like the 2-track tape machine. It's also the monitoring path, so if we push the left and right, you're going to hear it in both speakers. Down here we have a pan knob. This can be enabled to pan to the 2-track or to the 16 groups. So we have monitoring assigned, we got the input, but we're still not hearing sound. Well, there's the fader and the on-off switch. The on-off switch can be used as a mute. The green light will come on when it's engaged. Now turn up your fader. There's a little recap. Set your micro line level. Assign the monitoring path and volume. Make sure the channel is on and bring that fader up. With a vintage console like the Neve, it can be fun to overdrive the channel a little bit to get a little bit of distortion. We don't need this much right now, but it's always something fun to try, especially with drums. I'll just back it down a little more. To engage the EQ, push this button. Most of the EQ modules on this desk are the 3115, which is very similar to a 1073. It's got a high pass filter, a low cut, and 2 peaking bands. So up on top, right below the input control, is a high shelf with a fixed frequency. The 2 medium bands are switchable. These are 2-tiered knobs. The lower knob is the frequency selector, and upper is plus or negative gain. Back over at the routing section and the pan knob, to enable panning to the 2-track, we push this button, and now we can pan freely. Now I actually have a stereo drum recording coming in on 1 and 2, so let's set up the second track. So here are those steps again. You set your micro line level, enable the 2-track send and turn up the volume, turn the track on, and bring the fader up. Okay, so I have 2 signals coming in now, but right now it's just louder. And that's because we need to pan 1 to the left and 1 to the right. There's 2 ways to do it. The first one is how I just showed. You can enable panning, send 1 to the right and 1 to the left. But another way is disable panning and then only send 1 channel to the left and 1 to the right. So I'll disable the switches I'm not needing. Now they're fully panned. So this is a little bit faster if you know you want a stereo source hard panned. Tracks 13 through 24 on this console are outfitted with a different EQ, the 3114. I've got another signal coming out, multi-track output 3, so let's route that to this channel. Over here, multi-track output 3, I'm going to plug that in to line input 13. So to get sound, we'll go through the familiar steps of setting micro line level, enable routing, turn the track on, and set the fader level. So the 3114 EQ is similar to the better known 1081 EQ. It has high and low pass filters, adjustable frequency for the high shelf, and it also has more frequencies available for these mid-bands. Just like the other EQ module on this desk, lower knob is the frequency band, upper is the gain plus or minus. The boosting sounds really good on this desk. The cutting's cool too. So this console doesn't have a normal solo in place button, but you can use the AFL after fader listen switch. You need to enable the cue to monitor button in the middle of the desk to use this, or else the AFL button will just send the channel to this tiny speaker here. Next I'm going to show how you use insert effects and send effects on this desk. I have a little mix here with some drums and also a few other things that I'll bring in later. Let's start by putting an 1176 compressor on the snare. Who can argue with that? We're going to be using the pre-fader insert point, which is after the EQ, but before the fader. All of the outputs on the patchbay are labeled red and inputs are green. So coming out of the red pre-fader insert for 3, into the green 1176 in, out of the red 1176 output, and back into the green insert point for channel 3. There's no button for enabling the insert. It's always active, so now that we're sending audio through it, we're getting that coming to the compressor. If we want to do a send effect, where we still hear the original channel unprocessed, but we're sending to another effect like a reverb, we use the foldbacks. So you press the foldback you want to enable and turn up the corresponding knob. Going to be sending a synth here. Back on the patchbay, there's the foldback output. I'm going to plug that into the input of this Moog delay. Coming out. And now I need to go to an unused channel. So I'm just going to come into a channel on the other side of the board here and enable that channel. Just like before. Turn on the channel and turn up the fader. So as you can hear, the original signal isn't being affected, but I'm sending to this delay. I can also send the delay pre-fader, so even if I turn the fader all the way down, we still get signal going to the delay, which can be a cool effect. Now there's also reverb sends, which are hooked up to a spring reverb in the basement. Just gotta push these black buttons and turn up the corresponding knob. These come back on their own dedicated reverb channels in the center of the desk, these blue ones here. And there's also this cool little control that changes the spring tension. Now the reverb channels are just like the other channels on the desk. You need to turn them on and route them somewhere, but I've gone over that enough times in this video. You can just follow any of the other examples. So whether you're doing a tracking session or a mixing session, at some point you're probably going to want to record something to the tape machine or computer. The 2T mix that we've been using to monitor throughout this video already sends to the ATR 102 2-track machine at the back of the room. You can also patch those manually to the computer if you'd like to record a mix down from the desk. You'll want to come out of the red studio output and go into any of these multi-track inputs. Remember that those are set on the back of the patch bay to either go to computer or tape. Every channel on the board has a direct output available on the patch bay, but the fastest way to send many tracks to record at once is through the groups. Now the groups we kind of glossed over earlier, they're half normaled to the multi-track inputs, which means they'll automatically send to whatever you've selected as the multi-track inputs. So these are the groups here. They're a lot like the channels. They have a monitor routing control that can send to the 2-track. They have pans. They have sends to the foldbacks and reverb. They don't have EQ. The red fader is the final level to tape, and just like the channels, the on switch needs to be on, and monitoring must be on to hear it. There's a little example of when and how you'd use groups. Imagine you're doing a mixing session and you want to record every track with all the board EQs and effects back into the computer. So I'm going through right now and I'm turning off all the sends to the 2-track because we're going to now monitor from the groups. So I'll be sending all the tracks to the corresponding group, 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, and so on for all the channels we have recorded here. Over on the groups, I'm going to turn them all on, and I'm also going to turn on the 2-track monitoring, because now we're monitoring from the groups instead of the individual channels. You could do both, but you're just getting the same signal in 2 places. So that could be useful as using the groups for parallel chains. As we mentioned before, the groups are half normaled to the multi-track inputs that go to the tape or DAW. So as I play and bring up these faders, these are all going to be sending to the corresponding track on the tape machine or DAW. You can also use the groups as submixes. So if you want to send all your drums to 1 or 2 tracks, the groups do have their own group inserts. And you could also use the groups, like I said earlier, as parallel chains, or you could use them to blend multiple tracks, like a top and bottom snare mic, to 1 track on the tape machine. Just send them to the same group. In this section of the video, I'm going to go through a few last things that are interesting or useful to know for using this board. So over here in the Talkback section, there's the volume, and this control will send the Talkback to the studio output. So the studio output's useful because it sends the stereo mix from the board, but when you press that button down, it also sends the Talkback. Comes out of these red points here, and I'll plug it into the MyTech Private Q headphone monitoring system, stereo 1 left and stereo 1 right. So now everyone who has headphones can easily turn up the whole mix and the Talkback. If the spirit moves you, you can send something to that tiny speaker. That's the input. I'm just gonna plug in that mono mix. That mono mix. Well, that's the end of the video. Okay, well, that's the end of the video. I hope it was helpful and entertaining and interesting and all those things that videos are supposed to be. If I did miss anything, please leave a comment with any questions, and one of us will do our best to answer it. Also, there's a lot of gear at this studio, and we'd love to keep doing videos, so let us know if there's any gear in particular you want to see a video about. Liking and subscribing can't hurt, because that'll just encourage us to do more and more and more. So goodbye. Thank you for watching.